Growing up in South Central Los Angeles was very challenging. I found that, well, first, in order to tell you how challenging it was, I would have to start by telling you what it was like prior to the 80s. In the 1970s, South Central Los Angeles was a somewhat rough and tumble environment, but it was palpable. You could deal with it. I found that when one of my neighbors, a hustler named Freeway Ricky, began selling crack cocaine in the 80s. And this was a very early 80s, like 1980, 81, before it had become an epidemic amongst the entire country. Prior to that, the neighborhood was rough, but you could deal with it. For me, being 9 years old in 81, the issue was that there was an extreme shift. By the time I had become 13, the neighborhood had been hit with a flood of money. Lots of people had money. I remember as a small child, the 17-year-old boys on the corners at the and at the hanging out in front of the payphones, and also at the local park, Algin Sutton Park on Manchester and Hoover Street, would offer us $50 a day to be their lookouts. Now, at this age, I was old enough to recognize that at 10, 11, and 12 years old that this would be a mistake. The other boys did not care. You know, when you have $50 a day, you could buy all the comic books, the toys, all the Zuzus and the Wham Whams. That's what we called it. Anything that you wanted. And it seemed like a flood of money in our neighborhood. But it was a very damaging flood of money. You know, on Figueroa Street where I lived, we saw women who were school teachers and school nurses and women who were educated and doing something for their community. All of a sudden, they were whoring on the corner and doing anything for $20. My neighborhood became rough. You know, being in a gang in South Central Los Angeles was more of an outcast thing in the 70s, though it existed. It wasn't as extreme as the 80s. It seemed like everyone wanted to join the local gangs just because you could get paid. You know, 17-year-old boys were, in 1983, 84, they were making $200, $300, $400 a day, sometimes $2,000 a week, just standing on the corner or in front of the payphones. It had become very rough. And since I was young enough to be slightly involved, but not old enough to really protect myself from the dangers of it, I opted to stay away from it. It created an environment where many of us who were the square clean cut kids going to Christian school as I was, we became recluses. We stopped going out. We stopped hanging out. We stopped being part of our communities. You know, it was dangerous just to play Little League now, because not because the park was too violent, but because there was too much temptation. I watched one of my brothers, who was already a drug dealer on his own, become a drug addict. I watched my other brother, you know, turn into a carjacker and an armed robber, and then later on be murdered around the corner from my home. It was difficult. And if you were a square kid who was staying out of trouble, it was even more difficult. I mean, as many good times as I had in South Central in the 80s, the bad times overshadowed them. You know, people robbing you on the corners. I remember being 13 and grown men would just beat you up and take your money. And I know I was that 13-year-old boy. I had that happen to me. And he beat me up and only took $14 from me. I remember men who were in our community would teach you how to fix a car, how to tie a tie. You know, I had no father. So different men in the community, when you have no father, they become surrogate father figures. And one guy teaches you how to tie a tie, another guy teaches you how to fix a car or a bicycle, another guy teaches you how to fight. Those same guys who were helpful only a few years earlier became the most dangerous guys in our communities. Even the clean-cut guys, once they became addicted, became dangerous. Even though many of us, I would say most of us in the community, were not a part of this trade, we were all affected in a very harsh and difficult way. And though it was extremely exciting, though, it was a roller coaster ride. And the odd thing about it is when you get away from it, you kind of miss it. the peace and calm you get from living in a different neighborhood seems odd. It's like something's missing, even though it was a bad thing that was missing. It's really hard to put into words. Because though we did have some good times, the bad times were extreme. I mean, I remember once being on a basketball court and getting into a fight, and the guys were so mad that the nerd beat them up, they pulled a gun out and shot me. I remember after that, I changed. I was 18 years old at this point, and I decided I'm going to be a bit more one of the badasses. And actually achieved that without getting in trouble, of course, not in a harsh way. But it turned some of the polite Mr. Nice Guys into much more rough and tumble men, because being the clean-cut Christian schoolboy actually made it more difficult to survive. Those lessons they taught us, be nice, be polite, yes sir, no ma'am, they did not work in the violent streets. Some of us become more dangerous than some of the bad boys. I know I was one of them. And I have to say, when the crack epidemic ended and things slowed down, the oddest thing was some of us were the last men standing, because it took out so many other young men. So many went to prison, so many died. And I knew guys my own age who had been long dead. That those of us who stayed out of the trouble a bit more, we became the more prominent people in the community. And I thought that was quite odd, because you wouldn't have thought the nerdy kid from 1983 would be more of a dominant personality in his communities 25 years later. But it was some tough going in South Central Los Angeles, but I think it forged me. And in some ways, I've learned to appreciate that.